The first time Leon Hart saw her, she was doing a remarkably good impression of a statue. If statues came with dusty armor plating, a dead neural interface socket, and a glare that could turn to milk sour. He'd wandered into the ruined Asalari outpost, expecting scrap metal, maybe a few data cores, and if the scavenger gods were kind, something worth smuggling past command. Instead, he found her sitting in a corner, completely still, like someone had hit pause 2 decades ago and forgotten to hit play again. Whoa, he muttered, lowering his pulse rifle. Either you're the galaxy's creepiest mannequin, or you've got some serious commitment to awkward silences. Her long ears twitched. Barely. Leon blinked. Okay, not a mannequin. You hear me in there? I'm not here to shoot you. Unless you're a vending machine in disguise, those things keep stealing my credits. No answer. He took a cautious step closer. She didn't flinch. Her armor looked ceremonial, ancient even, covered in the fine ash that coated everything on this half-dead moon. The neural socket at the base of her skull sparked once, feebly, then went dark again. He crouched beside her, trying not to make any sudden moves. Look, I know this is probably a sacred site or whatever, but technically it's been flagged as abandoned, which means I'm legally allowed to loot it. I promise I won't take anything sacred, or sharp, or glowing, especially not if it hisses. Her gaze flicked to him, just once, slow, calculating. Definitely alive. Leon grinned. That's progress. Can you talk? Blink once for yes, twice for sarcasm. Her voice, when it came, was like stone cracking. You are loud. He leaned back on his heels, pleased. You're not wrong, but I've been alone on this rock for 3 days, and my only conversation was with a talking ration bar. You're already a better listener. She looked at him, really looked this time, and something ancient passed behind her eyes. Why are you here? Officially, to retrieve a defunct memory core for military archiving. Unofficially? He shrugged. I needed a break from my squad's endless debates about which cafeteria soup is secretly poison. Spoiler, it's all of them. She said nothing. He scratched the back of his neck, then stood. You hungry? I've got freeze-dried noodles that taste like regret and maybe chicken. Don't move. Wait, right, never mind. Sit tight. By the time he returned, she hadn't budged. He offered the food packet with a small flourish. Gourmet, vintage 2 days ago, best before last week. She ignored it. You're playing hard to feed, he said, settling down beside her again. I'm Leon, by the way. Sergeant Leon Hart. You don't have to tell me your name, but if you don't, I'm going to call you Stony Face. And you really don't want that to stick. There was the faintest upward twitch of her lips, or maybe it was a trick of the light. He stayed the night, nestled in the ruins beside her, like a squat armored raccoon. His portable shelter glitched every hour, blasting him with re-entry alarms or demanding he update the firmware with a 48-character password. He gave up, threw a thermal blanket over both of them, and declared it a bonding exercise. Morning came in dull streaks through the shattered dome. She hadn't slept. He had, badly. Leon stretched, bones popping. So, plan of the day, I fix my shelter before it tries to kill me again, and you tell me your favorite type of noodle. She didn't respond. He sighed and stood. Fine. We'll do it your way. Over the next 2 days, he scavenged tech from the surrounding wreckage. Old stabilizers, cracked consoles, forgotten Ysalari medtech. He tinkered between stories. She listened in silence as he described Earth's weather tantrums, his grandmother's obsession with potatoes, and the time he accidentally seduced an ambassador's wife while impersonating a janitor. That last one got a cough of laughter from her, sharp and sudden like thunder on a still lake. You're not awful, she said at last. He beamed. High praise. Next, we'll work on compliments. She surprised him that evening by asking, Why did you really stay? He tilted his head. You look like you'd been alone too long, and someone once told me, if you find a ghost who still talks back, you owe them dinner. I am not a ghost. Nope. You're a very sarcastic alien in a very broken suit. Her eyes narrowed. Do not mock the armor. Wouldn't dream of it, but I am going to fix your interface. Her hand clamped down on his wrist, alarmingly strong for someone motionless for 20 years. Don't? He met her gaze without flinching. Why not? It won't work. You tried everything? I was Ysalari High Guard. They brought me the best. It failed. He gently pulled his hand free. Maybe they weren't stubborn enough, or stupid enough. Lucky for you, I'm both. She watched him warily as he began rewiring a spinal adapter using a toothbrush, 2 fuses, and a slightly melted spoon. Is that standard human tech? No, he said. This is what we call improvisation, also known as, I really hope this doesn't explode. The device sparked, then hummed faintly. Her fingers twitched. Just barely. Leon blinked. Did you see that? You moved. No. Yes, you did. I have excellent eyesight. Enhanced, military grade. I once spotted a bug in my cereal from 20 meters. That is not impressive. You've clearly never had space cereal. He looked at her again, more seriously now. Listen, I'm not promising anything. I'm just saying, if you do want to walk again, maybe it doesn't have to be a lost cause. Her voice was quiet. It hurt to hope. He nodded. It always does. They sat in silence for a while, the buzz of the interface pulsing like a heartbeat. He finally said, You know, you never told me your name. She hesitated, then spoke, voice softer than before. Kalira, he smiled. Nice to meet you, Kalira. Let's teach those legs to wake up, one sarcastic insult at a time. The interface groaned as Leon tightened the last coupling, a chorus of sparks crackling up his arm like the outpost's way of saying, Thanks, now leave. He yelped and jerked back, shaking his fingers. Okay, either I just gave myself a tiny lightning massage, or your ancient hardware is possessed. Kalira didn't move, but her eyes slid toward him. You're not qualified. Probably not. But you should have seen my medical school rejection letter. Very flattering. Said I was too charming to be a surgeon. Do all humans survive this long with so little skill? Leon grinned. You're welcome, by the way. That twitch in your leg last night? That wasn't a muscle spasm. That was science. Primitive science. Hey, that primitive science was made with the holy trinity of desperation. A bootlace, repurposed drone wiring, and a half-chewed mint strip. I didn't ask for mint. Exactly, that's why it worked. Kalira closed her eyes as if trying to vanish him from existence through sheer mental will. It hadn't worked yet, much to her disappointment. She hadn't wanted help. Definitely hadn't wanted a mouthy human who whistled off-key and narrated his every repair like he was starring in a soap opera. But something inside her had shifted, slightly, subtly, like tectonic plates brushing fingertips after a millennia-long standoff. Leon shuffled over with a makeshift brace in his hands, humming a tune that might have once been part of a military cadence before being tragically assaulted by creativity. He knelt beside her, holding up the brace like it was a trophy. This, he said proudly, is the future of mobility. Human ingenuity meets Uisalari engineering. I call it the Walkinator 3000. She stared. He cleared his throat. Too much? Fine. I'll downgrade it to Walkinator 2000. I hate it. Perfect. That means you'll want to beat it, which means effort, which means progress. Kalira reluctantly allowed him to fit the brace around her leg. It was crude, bulky, a Frankenstein's monster of human salvage and his salary exocomponents. It beeped softly as it synced with the interface on her spine. She winced. Not from pain. She'd forgotten what real pain felt like, but from the warmth of it. A pulse, a flicker of life in muscles that had long since accepted death. Her right leg twitched again. Leon's face lit up. That's 2. At this rate, you'll be river dancing by Tuesday. Explain river dancing. It's like combat footwork, but more confusing and with extra knee flare. Kalira blinked slowly. Humans are strange. Flatter me more, I might cry. The next 3 days became a ritual. Leon dragged in parts, rewired circuits, and babbled endlessly while Kalira endured stretches, electrical stimulation, and an endless stream of questions like, what's your favorite fruit? And don't say plasma root. That stuff smells like engine coolant. She surprised herself by answering. Cereal berries. Really? Those purple ones that stain your mouth like murder juice? Yes, I respect that. He massaged her legs gently, clinically, fingers tracing lines long faded from use. So, you ever thought about standing up just to get away from me? Yes, daily. Good. Harness that rage. Kalira found herself anticipating his arrival each morning, not because of the therapy, though the progress was real, undeniable, but because Leon refused to treat her like she was fragile, or sacred, or broken. He teased her, argued with her, made her laugh so unexpectedly one morning she nearly dislodged her shoulder brace. When her left foot flexed for the first time, Leon dropped his wrench with a clatter and stared at her like she'd just rewritten the laws of physics. You're showing off now. I am winning. Oh, it's like that now. All right, let's up the stakes. If you can stand, I'll let you name my next drone. Pity prize? Motivational milestone. Also, I've been calling it Sir Buzz a lot, and it's starting to take it seriously. Progress was slow, imperfect, and filled with expletives, most from Kalira, occasionally from Leon, when the brace fried his wrist hairs again. The outpost, once tomb silent, echoed now with laughter, argument, and the occasional crash when a repurposed medbot tried to deliver tea and instead detonated the cup warmer. On the seventh day, Kalira leaned forward under her own power. Not far, not fast, but enough that her balance shifted. Leon dropped his ration bar mid-bite. Whoa, whoa, you moved. I've moved before. No, that was a lean. That was a stand adjacent. That was pre-vertical. She looked down at her legs, alien and unfamiliar after so long. They trembled under their own weight, unsupported. She pressed her palms to the ground and exhaled. Leon knelt beside her. Want a hand? I've had hands before, he smirked. Okay, want this hand? She glanced at him, then slowly took it. With a grunt, a pulse from the brace, and a furious argument between gravity and will, she rose. Not fully, not gracefully, but she rose. Leon's face split into a ridiculous grin. You're up. You're actually up. I'm vertical. You're glorious. I'm going to fall. You're our miracle, giraffe. I hate that. Perfect. I'll put it on a t-shirt. Her legs gave out and she collapsed. He caught her. She scowled. Do not tell the bots. Too late. Sir Buzz-a-Lot has already tweeted it to Central Command. She laughed. Short, clipped, unwilling. But it escaped anyway. Her breath caught after, as if surprised to find joy living in the same lungs as pain. Leon eased her back down. You did good. That was real. That was yours. She nodded, not in gratitude, in recognition. You're going to do it again tomorrow, he said. Yes. And the day after? Yes. And then we're racing. She raised an eyebrow. You'll lose. He grinned. That's the spirit. Outside, the stars shifted in their eternal silence, unaware that somewhere deep in the wreckage of a forgotten war, a woman who hadn't walked in 20 years was learning how to rise again. One bad joke, one flickering spark, and one human pain in the neck at a time. Kalira took her first full step before sunrise. The outpost corridor was lit only by the weak bluish glow of backup panels, casting long shadows across the rusted floor and highlighting every scuff her brace made against it. Her breath caught as the weight shifted from brace to bone. No collapsing, no sudden malfunction. Just pressure, just friction, just her. Leon was snoring on a pile of insulation tubing, like a man who had lost a bet to gravity. She didn't wake him. Not yet. She wanted this one moment to herself, like a secret between her and the universe, before he woke up and ruined it by calling her Captain Thunderthighs or something equally inane. She took another step, then another. Her gait was off, clunky, awkward, but every micro-movement resonated like a declaration. I am not finished. She made it to the far end of the hallway, touched the ancient comms panel, and exhaled. The metal was cold. Her fingers trembled not from weakness, but from disbelief. Leon snorted behind her. Either I'm dreaming or the outpost's haunted by a very determined kangaroo. Kalira turned. He blinked at her. You're standing. I'm walking. You're strutting. That's at least 3 steps into diva territory. She lifted her chin, deadpan. Next, I conquer stairs. His expression melted into something soft, reverent, like his sarcasm had been knocked sideways. Kalira, I'm proud of you. She tilted her head. That sounds dangerously sincere. Don't get used to it. I'll insult your posture in 5 seconds. 3, she countered. They stared at each other, then broke into laughter. His cracked like dry leaves. Hers was more uncertain, rusty from disuse, but growing stronger by the second. Later that day, the beacon lit up. Leon was wrist-deep in a defunct atmosphere processor when the warning blinked red on his old helmet display. He stumbled out of the maintenance bay, grease smudged on his face like war paint. We've got company. Kalira narrowed her eyes. Friendly. He tapped the console. Transponder says coalition. Probably a recon crew. She stiffened. They'll scan. Probably, but you're not the same file they left behind 20 years ago. I was a war symbol. He crossed his arms. Now you're just a war survivor. Slightly more sarcastic. I don't want to be a symbol again. Then don't. Be, I don't know. Be Kalira. The woman who tells drones to shut up. The woman who called me a fungus the first day we met. The woman who just walked 20 meters without falling over. She folded her arms. You're terrible at speeches. Thanks, I practiced in front of broken mirrors. The coalition ship landed 2 hours later. Kalira stood without braces, unassisted. Her legs were shaking, her spine ached, but she stood. Leon brushed dust off his jacket and looked like he was preparing for a very disappointing family reunion. The ship hissed as it opened. 3 figures stepped out, silver-armored, visors down. One of them scanned the area. The other 2 fanned out with efficient detachment. The first one spoke through a voice filter. Identify yourself, Leon waved. Hi, local nuisance. Kalira stepped forward, shoulders square. Kalira of Isalar. The officers paused. One lowered her visor. The moment stretched. We thought you were dead. I was not. You were paralyzed. I'm not. The officer's brow creased. How? Leon stepped up beside her, beaming. Advanced human technology, very advanced, involving chewing gum, defunct toaster coils, and the occasional miracle. Kalira shot him a look. And sarcasm. Mostly sarcasm. The officer blinked slowly. Command will want to see you. I'm not going back, Kalira said flatly. Not for ceremonies. Not for interviews. Not to inspire the next generation of martyrs. Leon chimed in. She's on her post-trauma sabbatical. Doctor's orders. That doctor being me, which is questionable, but I have great handwriting. The officer glanced at her scanner. This outpost condition is barely livable. You'll need repairs. Then fix the outpost, Kalira said. Not me. There was a pause. The officer, perhaps sensing the fire behind Kalira's words, or perhaps the bristling quiet of a woman who had already been remade too many times, nodded. I'll transmit a supply drop. You won't be bothered. Leon elbowed Kalira lightly. That's as close to we like you as military officers get. I'll start crying immediately. The ship lifted off 2 hours later, leaving behind a freshly packed crate of supplies, a solar array, and several puzzled notes scribbled by the officers about unauthorized medical engineering. Leon framed one of them, called it art. The outpost changed. They expanded the living quarters, fixed the roof. The water recycler stopped wheezing every 3rd hour like it had bronchitis. Kalira's steps became steady, strong. She began exercising in the courtyard every morning, while Leon shouted motivational phrases like, kick gravity's smug face, from inside his coffee bunker. Sometimes they argued, loudly, once over the ethics of mayonnaise, another time over whether Isolari poetry was better than Terran stand-up comedy. She let him win that one, barely. But mostly, they lived. Kalira learned to laugh at her own stiffness. Leon learned to shut up long enough to listen. When Kalira rebuilt her own mobility rig from scratch, sleeker, more elegant than anything he'd ever made, he clapped like a proud idiot. One night, under the weight of distant nebulae, Kalira looked up and whispered, I never thought I'd rise again. Leon, beside her with a cooling tea mug, murmured, You didn't just rise, you soared. She smiled, a real one. No bitterness, no resignation. I had help. I'm excellent help, frequently underpaid. You're not paid. Tragedy of my career. The stars kept spinning above them, the galaxy still bruised but healing, and in the shadow of a forgotten outpost, on a planet no longer mapped, an alien woman who once thought herself broken stood tall, not because someone fixed her, but because someone believed she wasn't ruined to begin with. The coffee machine hissed at him again. David Wren squinted at it, half convinced it had developed an attitude. He tapped the side with a finger, which only made the thing bubble ominously. "Make one decent cup," he muttered, "and I'll consider not throwing you out the airlock." The machine, possibly fluent in sarcasm by now, whined and produced something vaguely brown. He sighed. Life on orbital station. Theta 7 wasn't glamorous. Retired life never was, especially when you'd spent your prime years dodging plasma fire, patching hull breaches with duct tape and hope, and arguing with commanding officers who couldn't tell a fusion wrench from a pastry fork. And now, he argued with appliances. The station lights flickered, then steadied as if embarrassed. David took a sip and winced. Of course, the machine would brew revenge. He was about to hurl the cup into the recycler when the console chirped. Not the usual "oxygen filters clogged again" chirp. No, this was the "you've got mail" of the interstellar sort, haughty, imperial, and far too melodic for something that often brought bad news. He blinked. The sender ID was encrypted, then decrypted itself, then decrypted again, because apparently Elendari security protocols like to feel important. "Queen Arella of the Elendari Dominion requests your immediate presence." He stared. Another line blinked into view. "Attendance is not optional." "Of course it isn't," he said to the coffee machine, which gurgled in sympathy. By mid-afternoon, he was on a transport shuttle with a pilot who refused to make eye contact, and an AI named Jasper, who had the personality of a bored librarian. "Flight duration, 13 standard hours," Jasper announced. "I have queued a curated playlist of Elendari diplomatic overtures in 5-part harmony." "I'd rather be spaced," David replied. "I have noted your preference." 13 hours later, he arrived at Elinder Prime. If space had a Versailles, this was it. Gleaming spires spiraled into orbit like someone had challenged gravity to a duel and won. The landing pad shimmered with magnetic light, and the welcome party, draped in silver and red, looked like they just stepped out of a propaganda reel. He disembarked with the posture of a man who'd slept poorly and didn't trust anything that glittered. A tall figure approached. Royal Guard, probably. Ceremonial armor. Shimmered like a storm cloud. "Corporal David Wren," the guard said with a voice like crushed velvet. "The Queen awaits." "No time for a snack first?" David asked. "Intergalactic summons usually come with crackers." The guard didn't laugh. Elendari humor, as he recalled, was outlawed sometime in the last century for being inefficient. He was escorted through crystalline corridors that hummed softly as he walked, like the walls were gossiping about his boots. The palace smelled faintly of ozone and citrus. Statues watched him, not metaphorically. Some blinked. Then he entered the throne chamber. It was big, which was probably the point. Political scale and all that. At the far end, seated on a floating platform edged with living silver, was the queen herself. Long ears, pale skin, hair black as void space, pulled back with ceremonial bands. She stood as he approached, her expression unreadable. He stopped 3 paces short, unsure whether to bow, salute, or do jazz hands. "I, got your invite," he said. She looked at him for a long time, the kind of look that measured years, not moments. Then she smiled, hesitant, warm, and entirely human in its awkwardness. "Do you remember me, human?" David opened his mouth, closed it, then scratched the back of his neck. "Look, no offense, your radiance or luminosity or whatever title you use, but I meet a lot of people. I've saved a lot of lives. Some of them were probably yours." A soft chuckle from the throne. The ministers flanking her stiffened. Apparently laughter was a breach of decorum. "You once rescued a child from the wreckage of mining moon X3F, she said. "You carried her through fire. You told her not to cry." He blinked. A memory stirred. Fuzzy. A tiny shape in his arms. the smell of smoke. She had a necklace, he said slowly. Little glowing stone. Kept telling me it was very important. Erla touched the gem at her throat. Same stone. He let out a breath. Well, I'll be damned. I was 6, she said. You were the only human I'd ever met. You looked like a walking injury, but you didn't leave me. I didn't have much of a plan, to be honest. Mostly just screamed and ran in the same direction for a while. That direction saved me. Silence settled, reverent and awkward. Look, he said, shifting uncomfortably. I didn't do anything special. Just got lucky. Right place, right time. Also, I tripped over 3 crates. Not exactly a hero's march. But you were kind, she said, and I never forgot. David glanced around at the assembled Elendari elites. They stared at him like he was either a divine omen or an especially irritating insect. So, why summon me now? He asked. Her gaze didn't waver. Because the galaxy is changing, and I need someone I can trust. He raised an eyebrow. You sure you've got the right guy? My resume mostly includes sarcasm and minor back pain. Arala smiled again, wider this time. Those may be exactly what we need. There was a collective shudder from the ministers. One even dropped his ceremonial tablet. David sighed. All right, but I'm not wearing robes. I draw the line at robes. I'll make a royal decree, she said, and for the first time in a long time, he laughed. David's guest quarters were the size of a mid-range starliner, and yet he still managed to trip over the same invisible step 3 times in the first hour. The room responded with polite, ambient lighting and a soothing voice that informed him, very gently, that the floor had not, in fact, moved. I'm watching you, he muttered to the floor. The lights dimmed slightly in what he decided was a sarcastic shrug. Since arriving at Elender Prime, his routine had become a surreal blend of royal protocol and intergalactic absurdity. Mornings began with a 3-hour etiquette orientation led by a floating orb named Glim, who had a tendency to beep disapprovingly every time David sat down incorrectly. Midday brought him to meetings he didn't understand, surrounded by ministers with facial tattoos that pulsed when they were annoyed, which was always. Evenings, oddly enough, were reserved for informal cultural exchange with Queen Arola herself. That's when things got weird and oddly comfortable. So you mean to tell me, Arola said, perched cross-legged on a hovering cushion, that humans invented juggling is a form of entertainment? It was either that or more politics, David replied, tossing 3 Elendari fruit orbs into the air with only 2 crashing to the floor. One of those decisions aged better than the other. She smiled, then leaned forward. And this pizza you speak of, it's real? As real as heartburn. He didn't expect her to laugh, but she did. Not a royal chuckle or diplomatic giggle, but a full, uncontrolled burst of laughter that made 2 nearby guards exchange horrified glances. These moments became their ritual. The queen and the ex-soldier, talking late into the palace night, sharing stories of childhoods on different worlds. She told him of moons that sang during eclipses. He told her of Earth's Friday traffic. By the 3rd night, they'd settled into an easy rhythm, her teasing formality, his disarming sarcasm. But somewhere between the jokes, the memories began to bleed back. He didn't notice them at first. A sudden pang when she mentioned hiding as a child. The vague scent of burning coolant in the air making his stomach turn. He hadn't thought about that mission in years. They'd been ordered to evacuate the outer colonies. Civilian mining colonies, most of them in Elendari neutral space, caught in the crossfire of a proxy war no one even remembered the name of now. He was just a private back then. His dropship was hit mid-descent. The rest was chaos. Smoke, screaming, children being herded into evacuation tunnels, and him stumbling over debris, finding a small girl behind a fractured bulkhead. She was covered in soot and trying very hard not to cry. You told me I could hold your hand, Arilla said one evening, but only if I didn't wipe my nose on it. He blinked. That sounds like me, even heroic under pressure. You also threatened to throw a plasma grenade at your commanding officer if he left without us. Also sounds like me. The memory hit harder than expected, not just because of the danger, but because she'd trusted him, and somehow he'd mattered. That night, Arilla invited him to something called the Memory Hall. David stared at the pulsating violet archway. This looks like something that eats brains. It doesn't, she said, leading him in. It just lets you share them. Very reassuring. Inside, the room pulsed with low harmonic tones. Floating spheres of light drifted around them. She stepped onto a platform and gestured for him to do the same. You don't have to, she said, voice softer than usual, but I want you to see what I saw. Back then. The neural link activated before he could ask what the side effects were. A low hum echoed in his chest. And then, images. The crumbling mining outpost. Sirens. The smell of metal and plasma. A tiny form crouched behind a crate. Him, younger. Blood on his sleeve, speaking softly. You're okay. We're going to get out of here. But no crying. Deal? The child nodding, her fingers squeezing his, the hallway behind them collapsing, his arms lifting her. David staggered back, blinking away tears that didn't feel like his own. You remembered it better than I did, he said. I never forgot, Erla replied. A long silence stretched between them. I didn't save you for any noble reason, he admitted. I was scared. You were there. I couldn't leave you behind. It was just instinct. That instinct shaped my entire life. He scratched his neck. No pressure or anything. Outside the memory hall, the air felt heavier. He was beginning to understand what this all meant. Not just to her, but to the Alindari. He'd become a symbol, a human face attached to a story that had spread through their culture, reshaped their perception of humanity. And now Irela was using that story. She brought him into council meetings, had him speak awkwardly, haltingly, about peace, about cooperation, about how not every soldier was a weapon. The ministers didn't like it. One hissed through their gill flaps when David made a joke about how humans and Elendari both feared public speaking more than death. Another loudly declared him unqualified to advise royal policy, to which David replied, You're absolutely right. I've failed galactic history twice, but I've got a good gut instinct and a very patient friend with long ears. The room fell silent. Erla looked dangerously close to smiling. Again. Afterwards, she joined him in the garden that hovered above the palace spires. You're not what they expected, she said. I'm not what I expected. They think I'm making a mistake. Are you? She paused. Maybe, but it's a mistake I trust. They stood there a while, watching the bioluminescent birds circle the dome. David glanced sideways. You ever think maybe I should wear a cape or something? Really lean into this whole mysterious savior role? She raised an eyebrow. Only if it's waterproof. You sweat a lot during council meetings. He grinned. Noted, Your Majesty. For the first time in years, the future didn't feel like a report he hadn't read yet. It felt like something he might actually be part of. They were going to assassinate her. David found out by accident, which is exactly how he'd found out most important things in his life. Overhearing something he wasn't supposed to while trying to find snacks. The palace pantry was oddly secured, not locked exactly, just designed in a way that discouraged aimless wandering by peckish humans. Still, he'd mastered the art of a Lindari sliding door override, which mostly involved shouting "Open Sesame" and then pretending he knew what he was doing when it worked. He was halfway to a particularly alluring container labeled preserved starch sticks of lunar fire when voices echoed through the ventilation shaft above. The queen is soft, one whispered in Elendari. She has let the human infect her judgment, another said. Tonight, during the convergence ceremony, David froze, snackless. By the time he got to Erla's chambers, slightly out of breath and with starch residue on his fingers from a poorly timed detour, she was already dressed in ceremonial armor. Not the ornate kind, the real kind. The kind meant for fighting, not impressing. I know, she said before he spoke. I was hoping to surprise you with this treason revelation, he said. I was even working on a dramatic entrance line. They've been planning it for months. The moment I named you as my ambassador to the Terran Coalition, they decided I was no longer fit to rule. Well, you could demote me. I wouldn't take it personally. You've seen my track record with forks. Her smile was brief, but it landed like a sunrise. They're expecting me to walk into the Great Hall alone, she said. What they won't expect is backup. I was hoping you'd say that. I've been practicing my menacing scowl. David, she said gently, they're going to try to kill me. Maybe you too. Okay, maybe not the scowl then. But listen, I've had 12 years of semi-retirement and at least 3 missions that ended in spontaneous combustion. I've been bored. This is practically a vacation. The convergence ceremony was the most sacred event in Elendari culture. Held once every generation, it was meant to realign the Dominion's moral trajectory, if that trajectory happened to coincide with whoever won the last power struggle. David followed Arela into the chamber like a man stepping into a theater, unsure if he was the hero or the guy who gets vaporized during intermission. The chamber was vast. Hundreds of Elendari nobles stood in concentric rings, draped in ceremonial fiber weave. Floating platforms shifted silently overhead, carrying diplomats and psionic adjudicators. Arela stood in the center, regal, still, alone, until he stepped beside her. Gasps echoed like dropped glasses. One minister actually fainted. Arela's voice rang out, calm and clear. My reign has been questioned. My judgment, challenged. But I offer no apologies for choosing a man who once chose a frightened child over his own safety. David scratched his ear. She's talking about me, by the way, just to be clear. A flicker of laughter in the crowd, just enough to make the room hesitate. Then the lights dimmed. From the far end of the hall, 3 armored figures approached. Here we go, David muttered. Time to earn my ceremonial cape. The lead conspirator stepped forward, voice laced with venom. You have forsaken our traditions. You have corrupted our future with Terran influence. Step down or we will remove you. Arela didn't flinch. You want to kill me in the name of purity, but I've seen what purity does. It burns worlds and buries children. David leaned closer. That was so much better than my speech. Mine started with ladies and gentleworms. The traitors attacked. It was over faster than anyone expected. Arela moved like lightning channeled through silk, every strike efficient and merciful. David, armed only with a plasma baton and a deep loathing for cardio, managed to disable one with a well-timed chair throw. Tell the historians, he panted, that I brought honor to the furniture division. When the final conspirator collapsed, stunned and disarmed, the chamber erupted. Not in chaos, but in silence. Reverent. Arela turned to the assembled court. This is what unity looks like, she said. Not fear, not dogma, but trust between worlds. Later, as medics and peacekeepers cleared the hall, David sat beside her on the edge of the floating platform. So, does this mean I'm officially part of the government now? You are, she said. Can I make a law where we get more human food around here? Because I'm 90% starch stick and regret at this point. You may propose it, and you'll veto it. Almost certainly. They sat in the warm hush of aftermath. You know, he said, I didn't think I had much left to offer. I was just a guy who survived things. You offered kindness when I needed it most, she said, and you still do. He looked at her. Not the queen, not the warrior, just her. I remembered you, he said, not the details, but the feeling that I couldn't leave you behind. You didn't. No, he said, and I won't. Weeks later, when the newly drafted intergalactic accord was signed with David Wren as the first human envoy to the Elendari Dominion, he wore a slightly wrinkled ambassador's sash and mismatched boots. In his speech, he quoted her. Unity isn't agreement, it's trust. Then he added, and more importantly, everyone gets a slice of pizza after. The Elendari delegates were confused, but they clapped. The galaxy didn't change in a day. But it changed. And David Wren, former corporal, reluctant diplomat, accidental hero, was no longer just a man who had survived. He was a man who had been remembered. Elias Quinn was 2 martinis and a diplomatic accident into his worst Tuesday. Since that time, he'd been mistaken for a hologram during a job interview. This time, the problem was more planetary. He stood at the edge of a garden that floated several meters above a lake made of liquid crystal, trying to remember how to breathe in thinner atmosphere. Behind him, the glass doors of the Varelian Hall of Governance whispered shut with the finality of a prison sentence. Somewhere inside, a committee of very tall, very symmetrical beings was probably deciding whether to deport him or disassemble him for parts. Didn't even touch the ambassador's ears, Elias muttered. Just said they looked like artisanal cutlery. A polite cough behind him made him jump. A Varelian aide stood there with a tray balanced on one hand and the expression of someone who had just swallowed a lemon out of professional courtesy. "Botanist Quinn," the aide said, "you've been reassigned to diplomatic observation status. No further formal engagements are authorized. Your presence has been deemed ornamental." "Ornamental," Elias repeated. "Like a decorative shrub?" "Exactly." Elias accepted the tray, which contained a single cup of some sort of shimmering drink and a small sealed pouch labeled in Varelian script. He blinked at it, shrugged, and slipped it into his pocket. The aide did not blink. "Do not attempt to breed with the princess," he said flatly. Elias sputtered. "Wow, straight to the HR violations. She is genetically unsuited for such interactions. It would be undignified." Elias gave a half salute with the drink. "No breeding." "Got it. Cross-species decorum." The aide vanished. Elias turned back to the garden, sipped the drink, and coughed violently. It tasted like carbonated regret. Princess Arasia of the Varelian crown had never met anyone quite so biologically disappointing as Elias Quinn. His arrival had been unannounced, his clothes were wrinkled, and his energy output was so low her aura sensors thought he was asleep standing up. He bowed when they were introduced, then dropped his ID badge in the ornamental fish pond and spent 5 minutes trying to retrieve it with a stick. Her advisors murmured about Terran absurdity. Arasia remained silent, expression neutral, ears twitching slightly. She was used to being on display, used to the cold reverence of Varelian nobles, the way they looked at her like a cracked gemstone. Beautiful but not functional. Infertile. A word that had followed her since adolescence, whispered in court halls and input into genetic evaluations with cruel precision. The last viable egg had disintegrated under a microscope 2 years ago. She had nodded when they told her, smiled when the king reminded her that political marriages didn't require children anymore. Still, there were expectations. She was a symbol of continuity, a bridge, and bridges did not grow old without purpose. Elias approached her during a reception where he was very much not supposed to be. He held out a small, ovoid object, encased in a thin, papery shell. "I brought you a gift," he said, oblivious to the 6 different laws he was breaking by approaching her directly. "It's a Terran seed pod. We use them to coax growth from dying roots." Thought it might be ironic. She took it with 2 fingers, curious despite herself. "This is your idea of a diplomatic offering?" "Would have brought chocolate," Elias said, "but I wasn't sure if it would cause royal hives." Arasia didn't smile, but her ears twitched again. "And what is this supposed to grow?" "Hope," he offered. "Or maybe a really ugly plant. Honestly, I bought it from a spaceport vending machine." She should have dismissed him. Security should have dragged him out by his increasingly nervous shoulders. But something about the simplicity of the gesture lingered. She slipped the pod into the folds of her ceremonial sash. Later that night, she placed it on her windowsill. Days passed, then weeks. Elias was nowhere near the throne room again. He was busy cataloging Varelian plant life, some of which tried to eat him, while avoiding politics. Occasionally, he sent her notes. One had a doodle of a Varelian with sunglasses. Another was just a list of human foods with very questionable descriptions. She read each one in secret, and then the dreams began. Warmth, where there had been cold. A sense of rhythm beneath her skin, like an old engine turning over. Her physicians found fluctuations in her cellular regeneration cycles. Anomalies, but no one could explain them. She remembered the seed pod. When she opened it, the interior had crystallized into a starburst of pale green and gold. It pulsed once, like a heartbeat. She felt a sudden flutter in her chest. A week later, she vomited during a royal symposium on resource allocation. The court assumed she was poisoned. The physicians, after exhaustive scans, called it a digestive anomaly. Arasia knew better. She watched her reflection change, just a little. Color in her cheeks, a softness in her step. Her dreams deepened. She saw herself holding something small, breathing, alive. She confronted the royal medics in secret, They ran invasive tests. Again. Then again. And then they stopped speaking entirely. She was pregnant. Not artificially. Not via genetic coaxing. Naturally. She stood in the diagnostic chamber, the light humming around her like a choir of stunned ghosts. "It's not possible," one of the doctors whispered. "You've said that before," she replied. Her mind was a whirl of static, of Elias and his stupid jokes, of that absurd gift, of everything that couldn't be and yet undeniably was. She left the chamber in silence. That night, Elias found himself summoned to the palace gardens. He arrived in a wrinkled shirt, holding a flower he'd picked on the way, mostly because it smelled like bacon. Arasia waited by the lake. "I think I owe you an apology," she said. Elias blinked. "What, for the whole arrest threat last month? For not taking your gift seriously?" "Oh, well, technically it was a gag gift, unless it did something weird, in which case, look, if your plants start growing eyes, it's not my fault." She stepped closer. "Elias," he stopped babbling. Something in her tone cut through the ambient awkwardness like a scalpel. "I'm going to have a child." There was a long pause, then, "Okay," Elias said. "Is this a congratulations moment or a run-for-your-life moment?" She didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her sash, pulled out the empty husk of the pod, and placed it in his hand. "Whatever was inside this," she said, "it changed me." Elias stared at the shell, then at her. "Oh," he said weakly. "Oh no." She tilted her head. "You're not excited?" "I'm flattered and terrified, mostly terrified." "Good." And for the first time in her memory, Araja laughed. Elias spent the next 3 days trying to figure out how to Google alien pregnancy symptoms without alerting interstellar intelligence agencies. Unfortunately, Varelia's planetary network firewalled everything except diplomatic dispatches, cultural archives, and a deeply unsettling cooking show called Glands and Garnish. None of it helped. Instead, he wandered the hanging gardens with a datapad and a gnawing sense of cosmic responsibility. The plants didn't offer much counsel, though one carnivorous vine did burp when he passed, which he took as a sign of approval. The palace had not notably arrested him. That was ominous. No alarms, no guards. Just a politely worded memo that said, "Please refrain from further inseminating royalty. Regards, Court Protocol Division." He framed it. Arasia, meanwhile, found herself in a medical chamber for the 5th time that week, surrounded by physicians who whispered to one another in quantum-synchronized whispers, a sound like murmuring glass. Every scan, every test, every molecule of her blood said the same thing. She was no longer what she had been. "I am stabilizing," she asked. The senior geneticist, a woman whose age was measured in decades of research rather than solar years, peered at the results. "Stabilizing is not the word I would use. You are adapting." To what? To a biological logic that should not exist. The fetus is displaying hybrid markers, human mitochondrial signatures. There's even Terran cortisol cycling in your neural tissue. "I have stress?" "Deeply," Arasha nodded. "That seems reasonable." The real problem was the frequency drift. Varelians resonated at a specific biophysical wavelength. It was one of the reasons their technology responded to thought, their buildings to mood. Arasha's resonance had shifted, slightly, subtly, enough that the palace's doors now hesitated before opening, enough that the walls of her chambers pulsed off rhythm. The palace noticed. The king noticed. His inquiry was delivered via orbital drone, which hovered outside her window and played a message in his voice, sharp and polished as a blade. "Your condition has become a matter of state interest. Discretion is expected. Do not compromise the succession." She stared at the drone until it drifted away. Then she turned to her mirror and whispered, "Too late." Elias, in the meantime, had become something of a novelty among the Varelian lower officials. Not because he was respected, not even because he was liked, but because he was unpredictable. One day he taught the maintenance drones to play checkers. The next he reprogrammed a cleaning bot to play music from 1980s Earth, which caused a minor evacuation when Eye of the Tiger, was mistaken for a declaration of war. He tried to keep his head down. Really, but the anxiety leaked out in other ways, like narrating his own movements. "And here we see the endangered Terran male," he muttered one afternoon, crouching beside a bioluminescent shrub, attempting to hide from responsibility by pretending to be interested in alien foliage. "Interesting tactic," said a voice behind him. He yelped, turned. Araja stood there, cloaked in diplomatic anonymity and a hood. Her ears were hidden, but not well. "You can't just sneak up on people like that," Elias said. "I almost threw a leaf at you." "I would have survived." They sat on a bench shaped like a question mark. Elias offered her a snack from a pouch labeled Terran Trail Mix, now with 23% less regret. She declined. "I've been doing research," she said. "On? Your people, human history, your mating customs." "Oh no. Why do your males sometimes dance around with their shirts off to attract females?" Elias sighed. "That's not a universal ritual. That's just spring break." "And what is a baby shower? Why is water involved?" "It's a metaphor." "Poorly named." He laughed despite himself. Then she grew quiet, fingers brushing her midsection. "I can feel it," she said. "It dreams." Elias froze. "The baby dreams? I don't know if it's mine or ours, but I see flashes, heat, sound, a laugh. Yours, I think." He blinked. "Well, that's either deeply beautiful or the prelude to a horror movie." She smiled faintly. "Both, perhaps." Later, in a secluded part of the garden, they shared silence. Then Arasha turned to him and said, "We have a problem." "I figured," Elias replied. "Is it the whole accidentally redefining Varelian inheritance law thing?" "Worse. The court physicians have started talking." "To whom?" "To everyone." News traveled through Virelia faster than light and with worse grammar. Within a day, the whispers had grown into speculation. By the end of the week, someone had sketched a caricature of Elias in the style of an ancient fertility idol. He found it on a kiosk. He wasn't sure if he should be offended or flattered. Then came the summons. Elias stood before the High Tribunal of Biopolitical Purity, which looked less like a court and more like a very disappointed opera chorus. The lead official stared at him with eyes that blinked horizontally. "You introduced an unknown variable into the royal genome. I gave her a seed pod. She is pregnant, which makes it a really effective seed pod." No one laughed. "You will submit to testing." "I'd rather not. Refusal implies guilt." "I'm not refusing. I'm humorously deflecting." He submitted. The scans confirmed it. Genetic compatibility. Elias was, inexplicably, a catalyst. His Terran microbiome had activated dormant elements in Arazia's DNA, elements that Varelian science believed long extinct. Hybrid viability confirmed. The tribunal went silent. The verdict pending. They let him go, but his access was revoked. He was now a Category 7 diplomatic anomaly. "I've been downgraded," he muttered. "I didn't even know the scale went to 7. Araja met him later in a hidden atrium, where sound could not travel. She wore a cloak lined with static-suppressing mesh. "They're preparing to act," she said. "They'll try to neutralize the situation, quietly, without scandal." "You mean?" "Yes." Elias took a breath. "Then we leave." "Where?" "I don't know. I'm from Earth. We once elected a reality TV host to run an entire planet. We're used to improvising." She didn't understand the reference, but she nodded. They would go, not to escape punishment, to protect what they had created, and maybe, just maybe, rewrite what legacy meant. They left in a stolen garbage skiff. Elias had wanted to call it something noble, like the Starborn, but Araja pointed out that it smelled like fermented protein packs, and its onboard AI had a gambling addiction. It introduced itself as GREG, which stood for Garbage Retrieval and Environmental Guidance, and insisted on narrating everything it did in a deep, unnecessarily dramatic voice. "Now initiating stealth trajectory," Greg intoned, lights flickering with synthetic excitement. "Please enjoy complimentary aromatics. You smell like fear and celery." Arusha flicked a switch to mute him. They drifted out of Virelia's orbit, cloaked in the electromagnetic haze of the waste belt. their flight path masked among retired satellites and defunct weather drones. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't safe, but it was unnoticed. For the first time in her life, Arashia was officially off the grid. No resonance tags, no palace telemetry, no high-frequency crown pings. Just Elias, the dubious wisdom of Greg, and a growing, inexplicably human fetus that kept resetting her internal temperature like it was fiddling with a thermostat. "I think it has a preference for spicy food," she said one evening, holding up a ration labeled tangy Terran tomato with visible skepticism. Elias took a bite. "Definitely sentient. Also, evil," she laughed. "You think all your snacks are out to get you. Statistically, half of them are." They took turns piloting the ship, or at least pretending to. Greg mostly flew himself, though he complained bitterly every time someone touched the manual controls. "I was programmed for waste management, not fugitive obstetrics," he sulked. "You're doing great," Elias said, patting the console. "Just imagine we're the weirdest garbage you've ever handled." "I am." It wasn't long before the palace caught wind of their escape. Virelian long-range probes began to ping nearby sectors, pretending to scan for cosmic radiation spikes. Arashia recognized the signature patterns of royal trackers. Subtle, quiet, like a predator brushing against tall grass. "They'll follow the baby's frequency," she muttered, fingers spread across her belly. "It emits a unique resonance. They'll trace the anomaly." "So," Elias said, chewing a rehydrated nut cluster, "we need to unresonate the baby." "Do you hear yourself?" "I'm just saying. Maybe we need to mess with the signal. Scramble it, like putting sunglasses on a radio wave." She stared at him. "That's not how physics works." He pointed at GREG. "Nothing about this trip is how physics works." They made a stop at a remote mining colony built into the crust of a dead asteroid. Population, 17. Atmosphere, mildly breathable with occasional spice storms. Its inhabitants were primarily retired engineers, former rebels, and one woman who claimed to be the lost heir of an extinct galactic empire and made excellent sourdough. Arashia posed as a diplomat in exile. Elias claimed to be her emotional support human. Nobody questioned it. They spent 4 days in a lab rented from an old AI mechanic who only spoke in haikus. With her help, in a generous bribe of flavored oxygen canisters, they built a frequency damper, a wearable cuff that emitted interference pulses. Elias wanted to paint it with flames. Arashia chose matte silver. "Less conspicuous," she explained. "You say that like we're ever inconspicuous." When she wore the device, the baby's resonance dipped just low enough to blur into the background cosmic noise. It wouldn't fool a direct scan, but it bought them time. They used it to reach the outer edges of Terran diplomatic space. Elias had a cousin who worked on a spaceport near Glisa Prime, a floating market station shaped like a giant jellyfish filled with noise, smells, and mild violations of interstellar trade law. The plan was simple. Blend in, find transit papers, get lost in the crowd. Naturally, everything went wrong. Customs flagged their ID tags the moment they docked. "This name is flagged for cross-species contamination protocol," the bot said cheerfully. "Please remain calm while security is summoned." Elias punched the emergency release on the docking hatch and dragged Arashia into the main thoroughfare before alarms even started. Greg, ever loyal, dumped a container of bio-waste over the scanner array to block pursuit. "Covering your exfiltration," Greg bellowed. "This is my heroic moment." They vanished into the crowd while an irate customs officer tried to wrangle a very sticky sanitation drone. For hours they moved between stalls, through neon-lit passageways and under buzzing vendor banners. A merchant tried to sell Elias an illegal coffee plant. Arashia was offered 3 different job contracts as a model, a religious icon, and a motivational speaker. Eventually, they found a quiet maintenance tunnel near the underdeck. Arashia collapsed onto a crate. "We can't keep doing this." Elias sat beside her. "Number, but we can do it a little longer." She looked at him, eyes shadowed with fatigue and something else. "They'll catch us. Maybe not here, maybe not now, but they'll find a way. Then we run again, and again, until this kid grows up and declares themselves emperor of something and makes it retroactively legal." She smiled faintly. "You're very optimistic for someone without a plan." Optimism is my main coping mechanism. Outside, station lights flickered, and the scent of fried algae drifted through the vents. Araja leaned against him, the cuff humming softly against her wrist. Inside her, the baby kicked for the first time. She gasped. Elias felt it through her side. He blinked. "Oh," he said. "Okay, that's happening." "Apparently so." "Did it feel like a rebellion? A very small one?" They sat in silence, listening to the echo of pipes and distant music. Then Elias cleared his throat. "So, what do we name it?" Arasha tilted her head. "You want to name the potential heir to two civilizations like it's a goldfish? Well, we've got to start somewhere." She considered. "What's a strong Terran name? Genghis? Too genocidal. Beep boop? No. Well, we've got time to think about it." The lights flickered again. Somewhere far above, a message was broadcast from Virelia to every listening station in the quadrant. A royal decree. The child of Princess Arasha was declared a threat to planetary order. Its birth would nullify 1,000 years of succession. It was, according to the king, a biological revolution. Capture orders were issued, posters circulated, rewards offered. The universe had officially noticed. Elias checked the net feed. "Well, good news, we're famous." Araja exhaled. "That's not good news." "Sure it is," he said. "Now I can finally get those influencer brand deals." She rolled her eyes, but she took his hand and didn't let go. Elias was officially declared a destabilizing romantic pathogen by the Varelian royal court, which sounded more like a space-transmitted disease than a man who'd accidentally gifted an alien princess a child. He took it in stride, mostly by printing T-shirts that said, "Caution, may cause errors" in 3 languages, and handing them out to smugglers. Glisa Prime tightened its surveillance net, and staying put was no longer an option. Greg, recently repaired with parts of a vending machine and something that might once have been a toaster, plotted a new route. It involved 3 jumps, a refueling stop in a nebula, and skimming the edge of a pirate-controlled void called the Silence Fold. Araja gave it a 5% chance of success. Elias, ever the optimist, raised her to 12. Their child, still unnamed, though Elias had grown weirdly fond of Captain Wiggles, continued to grow at an unpredictable rate. Varelian gestation was already unusual, but hybrid gestation apparently threw out all the manuals and decided to freestyle. Arasia began to experience strange dreams, where she could taste starlight and hear voices speaking in both Terran English and Varelian harmonic syntax. "I think it's learning languages before it has vocal cords," she said one morning, sipping tea that smelled like ozone in disappointment. "Well, if it learns to do taxes early, that's just a bonus." "You joke, but we'll owe intergalactic back-child support by the time it's born." Between hyperspace hops, they stopped at a gas giant's orbital ring station. The station's AI was modeled after a late 20th century Earth celebrity chef and offered them unsolicited advice about seasoning during docking procedures. While they loaded fuel and hijacked enough nutrient packs to keep Arasha's fluctuating cravings satisfied, Elias visited the local data library to find someone who might help scramble their digital trail. He met a woman named Chell, who claimed to be part data broker, part archivist, and part fungus. "Long story," she said, poking at a console with a pseudopod. "But let's just say I used to be allergic to myself." She offered to erase their biometric presence from 4 major systems in exchange for a relic Elias had picked up from Araja's old quarters, a ceremonial comb made of bioluminescent bone. Araja wasn't thrilled about giving it up, but agreed when Chell threw in a location, a place called the Murmuration Expanse. "It's not a planet," Chell explained. "It's more like a place between frequencies, a sliver in reality. Your baby won't resonate there. The king's trackers won't see you." Elias stared. "Did you just describe an interdimensional safe house?" "Yes, and it has snacks." Greg was less enthused. "My hull was not designed for frequency bleeding," he protested. "You take me in there, and I might start reciting poetry." "You already recite poetry," Elias said. "Bad poetry," Greg clarified. They went anyway. The Murmuration Expanse was exactly as advertised. Unstable, strange, and filled with drifting pockets of soundless light. Time bent around the ship like a reluctant noodle. Greg began quoting from obsolete romance novels. Arash's hair turned briefly translucent. Elias experienced an entire day of his life backward, including eating breakfast in reverse. "I'm not cleaning that up," he mumbled, covered in regurgitated space toast. Inside the expanse, they found an abandoned listening post, a relic from a centuries-old observation program. No crew, no logs, just a working atmosphere generator and walls that didn't pulse when Arasha walked past them. They stayed. For a while it was peaceful. Arasia slept without hearing planetary broadcasts through her teeth. Elias learned to cook semi-edible meals using alien root vegetables and a deep fryer labeled "Do Not Feed Emotions" into this device. Greg developed a fondness for philosophical riddles and insisted on reading them at breakfast. "What walks on four legs in the morning, two in the afternoon, and seven at night?" he asked one morning. "Someone you should probably run from," Elias answered. Arasia laughed so hard she nearly caused a gravitational hiccup. The baby grew stronger. Its heartbeat echoed through Arasia's chest in rhythmic pulses that seemed to harmonize with the station itself. She began to sing, not words, just tones, and the walls responded, glowing faintly in sync. "It knows we're safe," she said. "It's the first smart decision anyone in this family's made," Elias replied. But safe didn't last. A ripple in the expanse reached them like a cold wind, space itself flexing. A signal. "Something slicing through the bleed," Greg reported. "It's royal grade, high tier, cloaked." Arasha stood, already reaching for her cloak. "They found a way in." Elias looked at the scanner. "How?" "They're using my genetic rhythm," she said. "Not the babies. Me." Outside, a sleek Varelian vessel appeared like a shadow peeling away from the void. It hovered, did nothing. "No weapons charged," GREG noted. "But broadcasting." Elias read the signal. "It's a message. From your father." Arasha swallowed. "Play it." The projection filled the room. The king stood tall, regal, carved from stern metal and colder pride. "You have violated 1,000 laws," he said. "But I offer this. Return. Bring the child. You will be forgiven. The heir will be accepted. Even the Terran will be spared." Pause, then quieter. "This chaos must end. Let us reclaim control. Let us shape the future." The message looped. They sat in silence. GREG was the first to speak. "It's a trap." "Obviously," Arasha said. "But it's also a chance," Elias said slowly. "If they really accept the kid." "They don't," she interrupted. "They'll raise it, yes, in a glass cage, as a symbol, not as family." Elias nodded. "So what do we do?" Araja looked down at her belly. "We finish what we started." They set a course, not to surrender, but to confront, to decide together what a future looked like. Not just for them, but for a child who resonated across stars, sang to walls, and had never yet seen a world that didn't want to control it. GREG grumbled about probability curves. Elias packed snacks, and Arasha, she closed her eyes, whispered a lullaby, and prepared for war. The Varelian palace hung in orbit like a celestial dagger, all spires and shields and secrets, and Elias hated it on sight. It was too symmetrical. No building that shiny ever told the truth. "Maybe we should park in the diplomatic zone," he said. "They'll expect that," Araja replied. "We're using the waste chute." Greg sounded positively gleeful. "Oh, my birth canal, how poetic." They dropped in low, riding on the electromagnetic backwash of a ceremonial cruiser. Greg disengaged cloaking just long enough to send a pre-recorded distress signal about his overflowing biological load and got them a clear path to subdeck access. Royal protocol dictated that no one, not even the High Guard, went near garbage mid-ceremony. Inside, the palace was busy celebrating Unity Day, a holiday commemorating an ancient treaty none of them truly liked. There were holographic doves and floating pastries. The atmosphere was spiked with something sparkly and probably toxic. The king was giving a speech, live-streamed across 9 star systems, flanked by stiff generals and one cousin who was always fainting dramatically for attention. Araja and Elias emerged in a service corridor behind the royal gallery, disguised as a diplomatic janitor and an oddly tall maintenance bot. Greg had uploaded himself into a cleaning drone shaped like a vacuum with legs and insisted on narrating their mission in noir tones. It was a quiet corridor, too quiet. Danger walked like a shadow in heels. "Greg," Arasha whispered. "Mute." They waited for the moment. The king's speech hit the crescendo. "And so, in defense of tradition, in honor of our bloodline, we—" Arasha stepped onto the platform. The audience gasped. Elias was pretty sure someone dropped a flan. She stood beside her father wearing the colors of exile, storm gray and gold. Her presence silenced the room like a power outage. "Father," she said, "let's talk about heirs." Security moved in. The king raised a hand to stop them. He looked at her belly, looked at Elias, who was trying to look casual while failing to blend in with anything. "You defy law and order," the king said. "You bring a human. You bring—" He paused, the word like ash. "That," Araja nodded. "I bring change." 1,000 nobles held their breath. "I was born under the laws of function and legacy," she continued. "I was told I would never have children, that I was defective, that my only worth was alliance." "You were not told that," the king snapped. "You were told the truth." "No," she said. "I was told the limit of your imagination." Silence. The baby kicked. Elias gave a thumbs up, which was met with horrified confusion from a nearby duke. "My child exists," she said, placing a hand over her belly. "And not in defiance, in evolution. Our people once feared humans as crude. Yet one gave me what science, empire, and all your sanctioned pairings could not. Possibility." "Disaster," the king said. "Life," she answered. And then, like perfect comic timing, Greg rolled in and sprayed half the court with celebratory glitter. "Birth announcement protocol complete," he said. "May I suggest cake?" The chaos that followed was dignified only in the sense that no one screamed loud enough to be picked up by interstellar audio feed. Nobles argued, advisors shouted. The king stared at his daughter like she was a glitch he couldn't debug. Then Elias stepped forward. "I'm not royalty," he said. "I'm not genetically special. I didn't plan any of this." "You gave me a puzzle box with a rock in it," Araja reminded him. "Right. I'm just a guy. But I love her. I want to raise our kid. I don't care about thrones or legacies or galactic PR." One of the nobles fainted. It might have been the cousin again. "I only care about making sure this kid gets to grow up knowing their mom is the bravest, weirdest, most brilliant person in any star system." Araja blinked. The king blinked. The room swayed. Then the child's resonance hit. It was soft at first, like a hum behind the ears. Then deeper. Harmonics spread through the chamber, touching every noble's badge, every data screen, every AI, syncing their frequencies for a heartbeat. Old courtiers burst into tears. One of the spire systems reset its orbital clock. Greg spun in place and declared the moment sufficiently climactic. The king exhaled. "This changes everything." Arasha stepped closer. "Good, it should." Later, in a private chamber that no one dared record, the king made his offer. "The child will not inherit alone," he said. "You will rule beside them. If the people see strength, they will not fear bloodlines." "I accept," Arasha said. "On one condition," Elias leaned in. "If it's about naming rights, I already vetoed Captain Wiggles." Araja grinned. "I want the Royal Science Division rebuilt. No more decrees about who's viable. Every being gets a choice." The king hesitated, then nodded. The agreement was signed. Greg composed an epic ballad titled From Garbage to Glory, a love story. Years passed. The child named Sen grew up with both diplomatic lessons and mud-fighting skills. They spoke 3 languages before age 2 and once reprogrammed a noble's monocle into a kazoo for fun. Araja ruled as sovereign and scientist. Elias became ambassador of unexpected outcomes. The court adapted, eventually, and in the garden of the newly rebuilt Institute of Genetic Sovereignty, under bioluminescent trees, Elias and Araja watched their child play, half human, half Varelian, fully theirs. "Well," Elias said, "we're not dead, so that's a win." Araja took his hand. "The future rarely asks for permission, but sometimes it accepts gifts." Even if they come wrapped in terrible jokes and suspiciously shaped rocks? She smiled. Especially then. There was a moment just before consciousness slipped, when Jace Rennick thought he could hear the snow laughing at him. Not in the evil, mustache-twirling kind of way, but more like a low chuckle from the universe itself. The kind of laugh you'd get from the cosmos when you tried to warm your hands by setting your gloves on fire. He lay on his back, armor cracked, boots half melted, and a chunk of ration bar wedged into his cheek like a fossilized regret. The mission had been simple. Get in, scan the research ruins, confirm the signal, and get out. The getting out part had apparently been optional. The drop shuttle exploded on arrival, his squad scattered or dead, and he'd ended up crawling into a frozen ravine like some injured badger. He was the last of them, and according to his wristpad's latest update, he had 43 minutes of oxygen and about one good curse word left in him. His limbs weren't cold anymore. That was the worst part. He'd been shivering for hours, but now his body just felt floaty and pleasantly numb, like he was about to be tucked into bed by a ghost. The snowflakes that fell on his visor sparkled like microscopic stars, and he wondered if this was how you got recruited into a celestial comedy club. Freeze to death with a grin and you get a front row seat. He closed his eyes, mostly to shut out the white glare, and tried to imagine something warm. A campfire, coffee, a vacation. No, scratch that. A bath. No, even better. Socks. Dry, thick, just out of the dryer socks. It was such a specific and glorious thought that he almost laughed out loud. Something shifted in the snow beside him. A crunch. Not the distant settling of ice, but a deliberate, close step. Then another. Jace's eyes opened a crack. Just a hallucination, probably. He'd already imagined he saw a polar bear riding a jet ski earlier. This would be less weird. She appeared like a dream, except dreams didn't wear armor. At least not armor that shimmered like liquid iron and made no sound when it moved. Her face was oddly human, sharp cheekbones, golden hair bound into tight knots, and eyes that shimmered with a gold he couldn't name. But the ears, those were definitely not human. Long, elegant, and twitching like antennae, sniffing the wind. Great, Jace murmured hoarsely. Now the elves have joined the intergalactic rescue program. She said nothing, just stared at him, gaze flicking from his cracked visor to his wounded side. He didn't have the energy to move, let alone look dignified. She knelt beside him, one hand hovering over his chest plate, not quite touching. Then she did something utterly bizarre. She sniffed him. It wasn't subtle. It was like she was checking to see if he was ripe. Jace, in his near-death wisdom, chuckled softly. Sorry, left my cologne in the other flaming wreckage. You like ode a roasted corporal? Still nothing. But her eyes narrowed slightly as if amused in a private, polite way. Without warning, she pulled a small blade from her belt, not metal but some kind of glistening obsidian that hummed faintly, and made a shallow cut in her palm. Jace blinked. Hey, listen, if this is about to become a blood ritual, I just want to say I'm flattered, but I'm more of a dinner and drinks kind of guy. She leaned in, close enough that her breath fogged the edge of his visor. Then, with the solemnity of a priestess at an altar, she bit him. Not hard, no tearing, no gore, just a press of her lips and teeth to the junction between neck and shoulder, right through the torn fabric of his thermal suit. Jace didn't scream, not because he was brave, but because his brain had hit a wall of confusion and decided to wait until later to file an official protest. There was pain, yes, but it was also heat, a warmth unlike anything he'd felt in hours. It radiated out from the bite, curling through his chest and into his fingertips like molten honey. His mind flared with images he didn't understand. Towering stone temples under alien suns, oceans filled with luminous serpents, laughter in a language he didn't speak, and then blackness. He woke to the sound of water dripping, somewhere distant. His throat was dry, but his chest wasn't tight anymore. The air was warmer, still cold, but not kill you in 5 minutes cold. He tried to sit up and groaned. Everything ached, but not in the dying of exposure kind of way. More like he'd been thrown through a wall and someone had tried to put him back together with duct tape and optimism. The cave walls around him were slick with ice, but glowed faintly with a greenish hue, like algae with a side hustle. Something sizzled nearby. A small fire set carefully in a pit of melted stone, crackled with the kind of warmth that made his toes twitch in delight. And across from him, sitting with unnerving stillness, was the alien woman. "Morning," he rasped. Or, eternal polar twilight. "Either way, thanks for not eating me." She tilted her head. "You burned," she said. Her voice was low, like wind sliding over ice. "Cold, ending. I gave you fire." "Fire," he repeated. "Right. The bite thing. Very warm. Very enthusiastic. Do all your people do that with strangers, or am I just lucky?" She didn't answer, but she handed him something. A strip of meat, lightly seared, probably not human. Probably. He sniffed it, decided not to ask, and took a bite. "You got a name?" he asked between chews. She watched him for a long moment. "Cathari." "Cool, I'm Jace. And, thanks for saving my life." Even if the method was a bit unconventional. "It was not saving," she said. "It was choosing." "Well, that clears it up." Outside, the wind howled through the cracks in the ice. But inside the cave, it was quiet. For the first time in days, Jace wasn't shivering. He wasn't dying. He had food, fire, and company. Very intense company, sure. Company that might have legally married him via tooth contact, but alive. He leaned back against the cave wall and sighed. "Still not sure if this is the weirdest first date I've had," he muttered, "but it's definitely in the top 3. Cathari blinked slowly. "I do not understand." "Oh, just wait till I tell you about karaoke." She didn't smile, but her ears twitched. Just a little. The third morning, at least he thought it was the third, began with Jace trying to discreetly chew on what might have been fungus-basted lizard meat, while pretending he wasn't watching Cathari sharpen her weird humming blade against the cave wall. The blade didn't make any sound when it moved, but his brain had helpfully inserted a high-pitched "ee" anyway, which made his eye twitch every time she scraped it. He shifted uncomfortably on his makeshift bedding of moss and something that looked suspiciously like alien fur. "You know," he said around a bite, "back home they teach us survival skills too. Mostly fire starting, water purifying, the occasional don't eat glowing berries talk. But I don't remember the chapter on alien woman saves you with bite-based CPR. That one must have been in the advanced course." Cathari didn't look up. "Your speech wanders." "Thank you. It's one of my best qualities." He leaned back against the ice and winced at the contact. The spot where she'd bitten him still throbbed faintly, like a pulsing ember buried in his skin. It didn't hurt exactly, but it didn't feel quite his either. He'd tried to ask about it yesterday, but she'd simply told him that the thread of life had shifted, which was either really poetic or really ominous. Or both. Jace had always found those two surprisingly good at dating each other. He finished his meal, wiped his hands on a piece of cloth that might have once been part of his uniform, and stood slowly. Cathari watched him. She always did, never in a hostile way, just with the unblinking alertness of someone expecting a meteor to fall on your head at any moment. "All right," he said, stretching his arms. "I vote we name this cave. If we're going to be stuck here until someone finally decides to read our distress signals, we might as well get cozy. I'm thinking Club Frostbite, or maybe Shea Corpse." Cathari stared at him. "No." She shook her head slightly. "Names are binding. They carry weight." Jace raised an eyebrow. "Right, okay. So we're not naming the cave because we don't want it to get too attached." "You mock," she said, but her ears twitched again. He was starting to learn that meant something. Possibly mild amusement, or maybe a warning that she was about to cut his liver out. Still unclear. They spent the morning, based on his pad's dying chronometer, exploring the cave system. Cathari moved like she belonged here, even though she told him this wasn't her world. Her steps were deliberate, her hand always near her weapon, and she listened to the walls like they were whispering secrets. Jace, on the other hand, tripped twice, knocked over a delicate ice stalactite, and narrowly avoided being impaled by what he'd thought was a harmless icicle. "I'm great at them," he muttered, brushing snow from his jacket. "Really earning my badge today." "Your movement is inefficient. I prefer creatively inefficient. Thank you." They found an old ventilation shaft deeper in the cave, leading to what looked like part of the collapsed research station. Most of it was buried in ice, but there were signs of life, or at least former life. A frozen corpse slumped against a console, its helmet shattered inward. Jace flinched. "Poor guy," he said quietly. "Probably tried to crawl back in. Didn't make it." Cathari approached the body with reverence, kneeling beside it. "Not your kind." "Wait, really?" He leaned in. The armor looked human at first, but the details were wrong. Slightly longer limbs. The skull, despite the damage, wasn't quite the right shape. "Ellery," she nodded. "What were they doing here?" "Guarding something." She stood and looked around. "A fracture runs beneath this moon, a place where the veil between things is thin." "Veil? As in like a dimensional veil?" She gave him a look that said obviously, without actually using the word. He sighed. "You know, a little more detail would really help me not panic." "There is no value in panic." "Sure, but it's fun. Keeps the heart rate up." He rummaged through the dead Ellery's pack and found a data crystal. Ellery Tech, smooth and featureless until Cathari touched it. Her hand glowed faintly, and the crystal projected a web of flickering light into the air. Symbols, images, fragments of thought. Jace couldn't read it, but he saw flashes, a dark chasm, shapes twisting in the snow, and a symbol repeated over and over, a circle split by a jagged line. Cathari studied it with narrowed eyes. "It sleeps still." That's the least reassuring sentence I've heard all week. Back in the cave, as evening probably settled in, Jace tried to process everything while poking the fire with a stick he'd named Kevin. It didn't help. Cathari sat nearby, her eyes closed, fingers resting against her temples. "So this whole lifelink thing," Jace said casually, "any chance it comes with a manual? Or maybe a Biting for Dummies pamphlet? It is not meant for your kind." "Yeah, I got that part. But now it's in my kind, which seems like someone should have planned for." He looked down at his arm. "I feel things, Cathari. Weird things. Not bad, just sharp. Like my senses are turned up past 10. She opened her eyes. "You are shifting." "That sounds like a werewolf thing." "It is a bond. I gave you my fire. Now it burns inside you. You may see things you should not." "Well, great," he said. "That's just what I wanted from a rescue. Visions and cryptic warnings." "You are ungrateful." "I am sarcastic. It's different." She tilted her head again. "You're strange." "Thank you. That's the nicest thing anyone said to me today." That night he dreamed. Not of home, not of warmth or laughter or Earth's yellow sun, but of stone towers cracking under black skies, of voices echoing in a language he almost understood, and of eyes, endless eyes, opening beneath a sea of ice. When he woke, breath catching in his throat, Kethery was already watching him. "You felt it," she said. He nodded. "And it felt us." Jace stood at the edge of the chasm with Cathari beside him, the glow from the broken Ilari crystal casting a faint pulse in the snow. The wind had died, not in the natural, "oh, good weather has improved" kind of way, but in the eerie, maybe the atmosphere got bored kind of way. Behind them, the cave system loomed silent, still holding the echo of dreams that weren't his and memories that had never belonged to him. "Well," he said, pulling his coat tighter, "nothing like standing at the mouth of a dimensional rift to make a guy miss the smell of burnt cafeteria coffee and paperwork." Cathari said nothing. Her gaze was fixed downward, into the darkness. The chasm was alive now, visibly so. Light shimmered in its depths, twisting like reflections off black water. Shapes moved, coiled, and uncoiled. Jace didn't try to count them. Numbers felt fragile here. "Let me guess," he said, gesturing toward the abyss. "This is the part where you tell me the ancient evil isn't fully awake yet, but it's stretching, doing some ominous yoga, and we've got a few minutes before it remembers it has limbs?" Cathari blinked slowly. "You joke, but yes." He sighed and rubbed the side of his neck. The mark of her bite had changed again. faintly glowing now, like bioluminescent ink pulsing beneath his skin. He'd stopped being alarmed about it 2 days ago. There were only so many existential crises a man could have before apathy politely shuffled in and unpacked a suitcase. "So," he said, "what's the plan?" "I mean, we didn't bring a grenade launcher, an ancient artifact, or a really sarcastic priest, so I'm guessing we're going with the improvised heroic sacrifice angle." "No sacrifice," she said. "You are tethered. You are the key." "Oh, good," Jace muttered. "The human's the key. That always ends well." She turned to him then, eyes sharp, ears lifted. "When I gave you the fire, I did not understand what would take root. You have made it different." "Different how? Like, more explosive or more, I might grow extra limbs, kind of different? More alive?" "That's disturbingly vague." He expected her to clarify. She didn't. Instead, she stepped forward and raised her hand. Energy bloomed from her palm, white and gold, edged with flickers of deep blue. Jace felt it resonate in his chest like a note he couldn't hear, but could feel humming through his bones. His vision blurred, then sharpened, everything etched in too much detail. "I can't stop it alone," she said, "but we can close it. Together." Jace looked down into the chasm, where something vast and coiled shifted beneath the ice. He felt it watching him, not with eyes, but with interest, like a person might glance at a locked door wondering if today was the day they might kick it open just to see what happened. He swallowed. "Okay then, let's slam this door shut before our interdimensional guest decides to redecorate." Kethery placed her hand on his shoulder. Their link flared. Jace felt his mind stretch, expand, twist in ways that shouldn't have been possible. Memories that weren't his swirled through him. Kethery as a child on her homeworld, training with a blade taller than she was, watching her sister disappear into battle, her first mission to a fractured moon, not unlike this one. He let out a breath that came out glowing. "Okay, so that's what mind melding feels like. Not terrible. Kinda spicy." The ground rumbled. The chasm cracked wider. Together they stepped forward, hands joined, and released the bomb between them into the fracture. The effect was immediate. Light lanced upward in a beam that carved the sky, searing through the swirling clouds. The ground shook violently, and Jace's feet nearly slid out from under him. Shapes in the chasm recoiled, hissing in soundless fury. The veil shimmered, screamed, and then closed. Just like that, like a book snapping shut. Then silence. Jace blinked. Did we win? Kethery's knees buckled. He caught her before she hit the ground. She was light, absurdly so, as if the fire inside her had burned away some part of her weight. Her skin was pale, her pulse thin. He pressed his hand to her forehead. "Don't you dare die dramatically on me now. That's my job." She opened one eye. "You are loud." "You're welcome." They limped back to the cave together. The temperature had already begun to shift, warmer slightly. The winds no longer howled but whispered gently through the rocks. The sky had cleared. A blinking red light shone faintly on the horizon. Jace's distress beacon. Someone had picked it up. Rescue came the next day. 2 rugged-looking engineers, a supply bot named Phil who insulted everyone in binary, and a half-functioning dropship that coughed its way down to the surface like an asthmatic dragonfly. Jace and Kethery were bundled inside, given water and warmth, and subjected to more medical scans than either of them appreciated. When they asked what happened, Jace smiled faintly. "We shut a door. You're welcome." He stayed with Kethery during recovery. Her people would come for her soon, but she was weak from the link. They spent hours in silence, sometimes just sitting, sometimes with Jace talking aimlessly about Terran sitcoms, food trucks, and why socks always vanish in laundry units. "You should have died," she told him one night, without preamble. "Yeah, but then you bit me and now we're best friends," he said. "Weird how fate works." She was quiet for a long time. Then, "You changed me." "Me? I'm just a guy who fell into a hole." "You are more. You carry my fire. You turned it into something kind." He looked at his arm, where the mark had faded now to a soft, faint glow. "Guess that makes us both a little different." When her ship finally arrived, a gleaming spear of silver and light that hovered over the landing site like a silent judgment. Jace stood with her at the edge of the pad. She turned to him. The link fades but does not break. He smiled. So, what? You'll still hear me if I stub my toe and scream profanity at a chair? Perhaps. Lucky you. She reached up and touched his cheek, something solemn in her eyes. Live well, Jace. You too, Bitey. She didn't smile, but her ears twitched. Then she was gone, walking into the light of her world, while he stood on the edge of his. The wound had healed, but the mark remained. And sometimes when the wind blew just right, he swore he could feel her laughter echoing in the fire beneath his skin.